somebody's sister, a brother, father, a mother, a wife or a husband, a nephew, a cousin. They're looking for a little bit of love, hey. Somebody show them some love, hey. Why not you?
Why not? Why not? Why not?
Why not you?
Why not? Why not?
Why not you?
This is the Why Not crew, and all we asking is why not you? Come with the Why Not you. And on this occasion, give one donation, and you may not receive a standing ovation. Nah, your reward is so much better than that. No matter the black can replace the feeling of giving a second chance in life. The only second chance is price is your commitment. Man, it's your compassion. You can come and give it, there's no special form of fashion. Giving a child another chance to smile, just imagine. Or you can try not to.
Welcome to the YNOTT Inspire show, where we inspire individuals to live their goals and dreams and to overcome all their obstacles and adversity to bring their dreams to fruition. I'm your host, Edward, Mr. YNOTT Drake, the founder of the YNOTT Foundation and a community investor. This show is brought to you by the YNOTT Foundation, whose mission is to provide support to pediatric transplant patients, promote disease prevention and wellness in the community amongst the youth population, and also to increase organ and tissue donation awareness. Now, I would like to introduce my co-host, Mr. Anthony McPhee. Please tell the world a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Anthony McPhee. I am a theater and business major with a music minor, and I go to Ashland University, and I'm a 2-time kidney transplant patient. I would like to introduce Dr. Alin Gragossian. She is a physician with a dual training in critical care medical medicine and emergency medicine, currently having served as vice president at Econos, an ultrasound med tech company. We would like to welcome Alin to the show.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, Alin. It's a pleasure. Anthony, please start off with the first question we ask all guests.
Yes, I will certainly. Okay. So what inspired you to take the path you're on today?
So my story, there was a lot of ups and downs to my story. So I'll give you guys a little bit of a background of exactly why I'm here today. So when I was in high school, I started volunteering in a hospital. Always knew that I probably was going to get into the medical field, but I didn't know quite what I wanted to do. I went to college. I was actually an EMT, got really into emergency medicine. And so I knew that eventually I'd end up probably going to med school just from everything that I had been exposed to. So I ended up going to medical school. After med school, which I graduated from med school in 2016, I decided to do some training in emergency medicine, followed by further training in critical care medicine. So basically I became an ICU and ER doctor. But in the midst of all this, so at the end of my residency training, me at the time, 30 years old with 0 medical problems, I ended up getting diagnosed with heart failure. The diagnosis was very sudden, and I found out that basically after lots and lots of testing, we found out that I had a genetic defect, and it had caused something called familial dilated cardiomyopathy. And the only thing that was going to help me was a heart transplant. And so I ended up getting a heart transplant within a couple weeks of my diagnosis. It was all very, very urgent. And I wasn't doing well, but I eventually got the transplant and, went back to work, finished my training and, decided to use everything that I had learned in med school and in training, but also with this new life experience of getting a transplant, to do what I can in organ donation world. And that's kind of why I'm here today. So it was a path that was, in the beginning, I thought I knew what I wanted to do. And then this health thing happened to me, and I'm still in medicine. I just try to help out in different ways too. So.
Awesome. And Dr. Alin, what was your thoughts when, like you said, you were 30, never had any prior issues, health issues or anything like that? What was your thought when you got that disturbing news?
It was crazy. I think it was so surreal because, you know, we're taught all these things in med school. Like if you're young and healthy and you eat well and you exercise, then you're never going to have issues. And that wasn't the case because sometimes things happen. Sometimes you have genetic things that you don't know about. Sometimes there's environmental factors that you don't realize you're going to be exposed to. So I started realizing more and more that, you know, I'm not invincible. And a lot of people with transplants, unfortunately, like finally like understand that. So it was a very surreal moment in my life when I came to terms with the fact that I had end stage heart failure. But at the same time, I feel like it helped me grow into who I am today. So I tried to think of it as, you know, it wasn't the best thing that ever happened to me, but I did what I could with it. And when I first got diagnosed, I was scared, but I also was kind of trying to figure out how I can use this in the future with whatever that I was doing. So it was interesting, to say the least.
Awesome. You can have the next question, Anthony.
Yeah. I think because I was born with it, so I've never felt invincible in my entire life.
Oh.
I was like the when I got a transplant, they were like gave me the talk because the higher rate of teens getting transplants is and keeping it is very, very low because
Oh, right.
you know, because we're all just angsty teens. But anyway, yeah, but how did that getting your diagnosis and everything help you interact with like patients and stuff? Like,
Yeah,
how did it before you got it and before you got your diagnosis compared to now?
sure. Basically, I feel like what I tell people, because people are like, oh my God, you must be such a good doctor if you know what's going on in the transplant world. And I'm like, yes, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that every doctor needs to go through some crazy health issue to be good. But I do think that it gives me this new perspective of being able to empathize with my patients, especially again, like younger patients. And by younger, I mean anybody like even under the age of 50. There's different health issues and different things in the hospital that we care about and different things about our lives than people who are, let's say, a little bit elderly with health issues. And I also do think it matters. I know lots of people, especially with CHD or congenital heart disease, who've been diagnosed since they were kids and they got transplants when they were teens. And I think that experience is very different from mine. Mine was like a sudden acute illness that had its own challenges, and then being born with something has its own challenges. But I do think at the end of the day, there's specific things that I could empathize with. For example, getting lab draws, getting different procedures done, what it was like to be on the wait list that we all share. And I feel like having that perspective just gave me this new side of medicine that was a little more human than what we're necessarily taught all the time. And that doesn't, again, I always like to say, it doesn't mean that doctors who haven't been through health issues are not good. There's just different understanding of things when you do have health issues.
Yeah.
Awesome. And my question would be, I'll revert back to like I said, when you first were diagnosed, you know, like been there, you know, I was in college when I got sick. What was your family and friends' reactions? Like I said, being so healthy and so, I'm sure you was living you're in a prime of your life, prime of your career. You were in school. Were you still in medical school at that time or what? But
this was actually residency. So it was a couple of years after I finished med school, but yeah, I was still in training. So I was still fairly young, you know, had never had any of these issues. And I do think that these things that happen to us, as we all know, you know, we're all transplant patients. It's hard on our families and those around us, sometimes even more than it is for us, because when you're going through it, when you're in it, there's different things that you're thinking of. And I feel like the people around you who are seeing you go through it, almost sometimes feel helpless because they don't know how to help you. I know that, you know, my parents, again, I was 30 at the time, so I was still fairly young, but like I was like their baby. Like they were the ones who were crying all the time around me, and they didn't know how to deal with all these issues. And a lot of my friends were sad too. So I do think having a support system is great, but I do think we need to acknowledge how difficult it could be for them at times. And it's not just always about how difficult it is for the patient. It's the families that suffer in their own ways too.
Awesome. How about it, Anthony?
Yeah, I can totally agree with that, especially from like my family experience and having 2 kidney transplants. What So my question is, like, how were you able to communicate how they were able to help you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So they would always ask me, like, what can I do to help? Or, you know, and it's not, or even patient families will ask me, like, what can I do to help, you know, my loved one who's in the ICU or whatever. And I always say, just being there, like being present and listening is honestly one of the most important things you can do as a support person. You don't need to bring me gifts every day. You don't need to make me food. You don't, like, me just knowing that I had my family, my parents, my partner, anybody who was there, just there to listen to me and tell me that they're there for me was just enough. I think everybody's different. I think there's some people who probably want other things, but I think in general, as long as your support person is able to be there for you on the phone, in real life, however they can be, that's all that really mattered to me.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that. And now, like I said, we want to speak to the younger patients who are in that children's hospital, who's receiving that disturbing news that you received at age 30. What would you tell them about those dark times that they think their life is over? They, like I said, what would you tell to encourage them about this process? Talk to the younger you, should I say?
The younger me, or younger patients in general, I like to tell them that it's a process that's just, you got to take it one day at a time. And it's so hard when you're young because I feel like you're always looking forward to the next thing. And it's hard to just like sit down and process the moment that things are going to take time and everything's going to be okay. But I do think that if I could tell, or even when I meet patients who are waiting, pediatric patients or people who are waiting for heart transplants, I tell, or, you know, transplants in general, I tell them, take it one day at a time. It's a very slow process, but it is a full process they have to go through, and just to trust it. And, you know, you don't have to worry necessarily about what's going to happen in 5 years with your medication and this and that. It's like, for now, just be there in the moment with your family, and take things as they come. And eventually you'll be able to get through this. And I also tell them that, like, just because you have to get a transplant, it doesn't mean that it's the end of your life. It's the beginning of a new life, is the way. I know it sounds super cheesy, but it is kind of a way that I feel like really helped me process everything that happened to me. Sure, I wasn't going to be exactly the same person that I was in November of 2018 when, you know, before I was sick, but I just have a new perspective on things and I have a new life to look forward to. So that's kind of how I like to encourage others, that it's not the end of your life, it's just the beginning of a new one.
Awesome. And what were some of your coping, like, you know, it gets dark. Like what was some of your darkest moments going through that? You know, like, I know I had days where I wanted to cry, which,
yeah,
why me, you know?
Yeah.
What did you do to cope through those dark moments, you know, where it felt like you maybe never was gonna get that transplant, or it never was gonna end, that storm?
It was really hard. And I'm sure you all have also experienced it. Sometimes I'd be like, oh my God, it'd be easier if I just like wasn't here. It'd be easier if I just didn't get the transplant. But I think ultimately what really helped me was, I think everybody has different ways of coping with things. For me, it was journaling. I remember I started just writing things down. I got an account on Squarespace to like make a blog. And I had initially, honestly, I was only writing things down because it was a way for me to express myself. But then I realized that people were actually reading it and telling me, oh, I've been through that. And it's so nice to have you like learn about it. So it was not only a way for me to express myself and my feelings and help process everything that was happening to me, but it was a way for me to write the blog and get connected with other people who had been through what I had been through, and we connected through it. So for me, it was writing, but everybody's different. I know there's tons of patients who like to write poetry or do specific things like painting or anything, something that'll just help you process what's going on is really important. And that's what helped me the most.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So all the younger patients out there, I hope you're taking notes, you're writing it down, because you're hearing it from a doctor/patient herself. So yeah, please, I'm taking notes. My page filled with notes, but Anthony, have at it.
So I know that you said that you were always going to be going down the medical field in some way.
Yes.
Who was like your prime motivation or inspiration to go into the medical field? Was it just one person? Was it your family? Like,
It was actually a couple of different doctors that I had met when I was in high school. I started volunteering at an emergency department really close to my house. And there were these two doctors who at the time, like I was like, oh my God, they're so much older and they're so great, but they had just finished residency. So they were probably like 30 and you know, this is their first like doctor job. And I thought they were so cool. And they're the ones who told me like even like pieces of advice, like I'd be like, medical school is so expensive, and they'd be like, yeah, but like we all have that debt, and at the end of the day you're going to be able to pay it off. And I remember I'd be like, well, what if I have to move? And they'd be like, it's fine, you got to move for med school and then you can always come back. Like, so they kind of helped me realize that if it was something that I wanted to do, I would have support and help, and I'd be able to become just like them when I grew up, quote. But I, like, you know, looking back, they were just like 30, they weren't even that old. But I thought that they were like really cool.
Anthony, you have another one?
yes, yeah, because I know that when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor, but I'm better at performing. I will play a doctor on TV. I can't do it in my life. But yeah, I just I just was like kind of astounded about like how your whole like how you got diagnosed so quickly and how I guess I didn't realize how like much older you were because I personally again don't have that experience
Mm-hmm.
like Edward and you guys both share that. I don't. I was born with it, but I was just wondering like do you still do have you had to change your routine because your transplant like
Sure.
the way that you had to take care of yourself when you were before you were diagnosed to now that you've had it for a couple more than a couple years
Yes.
and just stuff like that because I know that um, at least for me being 22 my body doesn't work the same as like say my friends is
At
because
22, right?
yeah
Yeah, I definitely had to change a lot of what I would do, but not too much. Like I think overall, so for heart transplant, I think it's very similar to even kidney transplant. But for example, like diet changes, right? Like before, whereas I've always been kind of a healthy eater, I had to kind of be a little more careful after my transplant. So there was the diet changes that I do. I had to learn how to deal with taking medications throughout the day. I found out that if I don't have an alarm, like which I think a lot of transplant patients do, like I have an alarm every like few hours for my medications. And then overall, even working at the hospital, right? Like I was an ER and ICU doctor, and I had to think about ways of how I could protect myself because I'm immunosuppressed around all these different patients who are very, very sick. And so even at the hospital, I had to be careful. I got my transplant in 2019, right before COVID. And so I decided that I was always going to wear a mask in the hospital no matter what. This was before COVID, so not everybody would always wear masks. But that was like another change that I made. So in crowded places and at work, would always wear a mask. I had to make sure that if I had to take my medications at, for example, 9 a.m., not to schedule any meetings or do anything around that time. So I have time to like, step aside to go take my meds. Diet changes. And then overall, just like, I was never much of a drinker, but obviously post-transplant, you can't drink as much because it interacts with medications. And so I had to cut out alcohol from my life. Exercise capacity was different too. So little things I had to change, but overall I tried to make it fit with whatever I had been doing in that point in my life. And so far it's been good. Like I said, I'm never going to be who I was before my transplant, but I can still kind of work around it and do what I can with it. So it was interesting. And obviously a lot of it had to do with like you figuring out your own routine. I'm sure there's transplant patients who, don't use an alarm and I'm sure there's patients who, have a different diet, so it's just everybody had to figure it out for themselves. And I have been trying to for a few years.
No, awesome. I love it. I love it. This is a two-part question I have. The first part of the question rather is, what is the most rewarding part of your job? And the second part is, what is it like working in a hospital setting now or previously when you got these health issues yourself? Because I know sometimes it's tough working with these kids in these hospitals, and I had contracted a role at this children's hospital, and I was going to send these patients, and it kind of was triggering something.
Triggering, right? Yeah.
It's like I couldn't see them like that because I'm thinking about my own self.
Right.
They bad news, and I'm scared about my own. So
Yeah.
what is it like? Yes. So what is it like?
So it can be triggering. Definitely in the beginning, it was more difficult, but I also tell people that I was a doctor before my diagnosis, right? Like, I think it would have been different had one of my friends, Kobe, has a heart transplant, but he had a heart transplant when he was a kid. And so he became a doctor afterwards. And for him, it's very different than me. So I feel like because I already had this like view of the hospital as a physician, although it's not easy and although it could be triggering at times, I feel like I was first a doctor before I was a patient. So I was able to compartmentalize it. At the same time, obviously there's times where like I have to step away. I remember one time we had to tell this guy who was around my age, maybe in his like early to mid 30s, that he needed a heart transplant. I remember I actually had to like just leave the room because it reminded me so much of the time that it happened to me. And so, it does sometimes happen. And for me, when it does happen, I just, take a few seconds to myself, leave the room if I need to. And the other thing that's really helped me is I'm pretty open about my story, not only with my coworkers, but with other patients too, who are going through it. And I feel like the more open I am, the easier it is for me to process the surroundings that I'm in. And I also always tell patients and their families, like, they can ask me anything. I give them my number, I give them my email, because it is nice to know someone who's been through it, to answer things in not necessarily as their doctor, but as a patient who's been through it. So I try to do what I can. Sometimes it is triggering, but for the most part, I've been able to kind of work around it.
Awesome. And what's the most rewarding part of your job?
So right now I'm actually VP of a company. And so although I'm not fully non-clinical, I got out of the hospital a couple months ago, just because I figured it would be nice to kind of go into med tech with this new perspective of what it's like to be a patient. Overall, the most rewarding part of being a doctor in general is just being able to help people, especially people who have been through similar things as me, because I can give them this perspective that not everybody's able to give them. So it is just nice being able to help in any way that I can. But even more than that, like as my new role as a VP at this echo company, it's really interesting telling people, in the med tech world about how their technologies are helping patients all the time. Even things like basic echoes, which it's interesting having a perspective like mine, because I can give them the medical stuff and do the medical advising, but at the same time say like, sometimes patients like it if you're on this side or if you're on this side, and that's because I've been there. So it's just nice to be able to use what I've gone through in any aspect of my job, whether it's in the hospital or as a VP.
Awesome. All right, Anthony, you got the next two questions. Then we're going to move into this special segment that we have, because like I said, we want to keep this 45 minutes so we can have a part two.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a college level question, because right now I'm in my undergrad, but for like other people that are either coming into school and stuff, like how were you, like with meal swipes and cooking, did you cook when you were in undergrad? Because my question is like, how did you balance that with like the typical college eating habits, which is, ramen and the most healthy stuff in the world?
So I went to UCLA for undergrad years ago, and I'm from Los Angeles. So I actually lived at home during undergrad. And so it was so much easier because like my mom would still cook for me. With that being said, when I went to medical school in Tennessee. And so that was very far from home. And I had to learn how to kind of, do all my studying, but also have time to cook meals and eat healthy and do that. And honestly, I would say like 50% of the time I was eating out and, getting whatever fast food I can and whatever I could get my hands on. And then, the other 50% of the time I tried to learn how to at least make simple but healthy meals that were actually still good. So I found myself making a lot of soups and salads, which I feel like are not only easy but also cheap and good for you. So it was an interesting few years, but I was lucky in that during college I still lived at home.
Yeah, I commuted before I transferred to Ashland, so
It's hard.
the food was relatively better. My parents can cook, so I was blessed with that. It's like I'm wanting to cook, and I know that there's other people that, as we were talking about kidney transplants and just being transplants, we have to be as healthy as possible. But with like college meal swipes and the food that is relatively available in a college setting, it's not always that healthy.
It's not, and it's hard, especially if there's a lot of deli meats and stuff, which we can't eat.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is really hard, and you got to do what you can, but like I said, like you can only do so, like, if you got to try, and if you can't, then
Yeah. More like the money thing is the problem.
yeah, that too.
But yeah, so since you got your transplant before COVID, how did that like change? Like when COVID hit, how did it change how your routine and how you
Sure.
did stuff, like take care of yourself, and especially since like mental health has been coming really big
That's a
in
really good question.
guys and stuff. Yeah.
COVID, I'm sure you guys remember in the beginning of COVID, we had no idea what to do. Like doctors didn't know what they were doing. Like everybody was dying around us. It was so difficult because we didn't even know how to manage it. We didn't know how to treat it. We didn't have any vaccines. And so I remember being in a constant state of panic, especially as like a fresh transplant recipient. I was like less than a year out of my own transplant when COVID hit. And so not only did I have to figure out ways to mitigate risks of, just like the regular transplant risks. So me just not getting sick in general and not being around sick people, but also now it was like extra difficult because I had to worry about COVID, which we barely knew about at the time. So I think what I had initially done, I was a resident at that time. I was still finishing up my emergency medicine residency. And I think I took a couple weeks off initially, like just to go home, try to figure out what I can do, talk to my doctors about what I should be doing at the hospital, because I'm exposed all the time to people who might be sick. And then with that being said, after a couple months of COVID, I decided that, there's two ways to see things, which I'm sure you guys understand. There's a way to like live in a bubble and be careful about every single step that you're taking, or there's a way to understand the risks, but still live your life. And so I think and not one way is right. I think it just kind of depends on how you are as a person. And so for me, I was more so the second type. So I was really careful, but at the same time, I didn't want, COVID being the reason why I don't do anything with my life. And then, once the vaccine came out, I feel like we all kind of like were a little bit, more calm, and we kind of understood it better, and we were treating it better. We had different medications for it. So I think initially it was a state of panic, followed by me just trusting what was going to happen, and then trying my best to not get sick. And then eventually, now we're here, and hopefully things continue to improve. I do think COVID is here for a long time. But I think now that we know how to handle it a little better, it's easier for many of us. Again, not to say it's completely gone or that it's really easy to deal with, because there's tons of people who still get super sick from it, but it's just something that we know how to do a little bit better than we did 3 years ago.
Awesome. So we're gonna move on to our next segment. This is awesome. I'm loving it. We're gonna move on to our next segment, which is called Family Time. Here at YNOTT, we're very family focused or family oriented. Why not replace, for me, my teammates from losing it in college and that whole college atmosphere. So we got hundreds of members around the country, and like I said, we're a huge family. So I would like to allow our producer, Miss Lily, and also our show coordinator, Mr. Philip Jones, to come on and ask you any questions that they may have. And yeah, so start with Lily. Go ahead.
All right. Hi. Thank you for introducing me. I'm Lily, and I know you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier about what offered you the most support from your loved ones during like the toughest times. I'm just wondering if there is anything else that gave you peace of mind, or any words specifically that helped you throughout that you might want to share with other people going through.
Yeah, I think one philosophy, the type of philosophy that I follow in general, is like stoicism. So it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like emotionless, but I try to take things as they come, and, you know, deal with it and then kind of move on. And I think when all this was happening to me, people kept asking, like, there's a few questions you're always asking yourself. So for example, I remember in the beginning, I'd be like, why did this happen to me? Like, why me? Like, you know, I'm only 30, like, oh, I have so much to do in my life. Like, why me? And then eventually I was like, having this like victim mentality wasn't gonna do anything, right? Like I can complain and be sad and be angry and blame my parents, blame a God, blame anything, but at the end of the day, that doesn't change what I'm going through. And so when I kind of came to terms with that, it helped me process everything that was going on. And I knew that like these emotions that I have towards this crazy health thing that I'm feeling isn't going to change the outcome. And the outcome is I need a heart transplant to live, right? Like I need to go through this and then I'll be fine. And so I try to tell people that, because I'm like, there's so much blaming you're going to do. You're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel sad. You're going to feel angry. But at the end of the day, none of that is really going to change the situation that you're in that moment. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't feel it. I'm 100% for like understanding your feelings and feeling your feelings, but I don't dwell on them. And I think that really, really helped me with that whole process. And when people ask me, like, they're like, well, how did you think like that? I'm like, I don't know. I just thought like that. It was nothing. That was just kind of the mentality that I had when I got really sick in the beginning. And I still go through it. Like, for example, because of the medications that I was on last year, I had to get both my hips replaced because I had something called AVN of my hips. And so I remember in the beginning, people were like, oh my God, I feel so bad. Like, aren't you upset? Like, aren't you have to take time off from work? And I was like, yeah, but that doesn't change the fact that I need my hips replaced. Like, well, I'll get my hips replaced and then I'll go back to doing what I was doing. So it is upsetting and it's good to feel those feelings, but at the end you have to focus on how to get better and move on from those, you know, crazy things that happen to us in life sometimes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm also wondering how your experience shaped the way that you communicate to other people about like what they're going through, and how you kind of empathize with them, and maybe like the type of, or yeah, just the words that you use. I don't know if they might have changed since you personally experienced what you have. So yeah,
like I'll give an example of how I talk to my own patients. I think the one thing that that I've really understood after all these experiences that I've been through is every patient and every single one of us is different. So there's going to be different feelings that I have about what I went through than the person in front of me. And so just being very understanding that everybody's experience is different when it comes to, you know, different health issues makes me kind of a little more, helps me understand that not everybody's experience is the same, and what we all go through is validating for our own way. Like just because I'm going through something doesn't mean somebody else has to go through exactly what I went through, and at the same time they're going to have experiences that I never went through, and I think that's okay. I think what unifies us all is the fact that we're able to talk about these issues that we have, and connect with each other through, I hate saying like shared trauma. I don't think it's trauma, but it is a way for us to connect and understand each other better. So I think overall, it just helped me understand that everybody's experience is different, and that doesn't mean one is better or worse than the other. And having that mindset about health issues in general helps you talk to people in a different way. So I think hopefully I did a good job with my patients, but that's always what I would tell other doctors too. I'd be like, yeah, well, just because that person's going through this doesn't mean the next person is going to too. And just because this person's in pain from this, you can't just assume everybody, or just because this person doesn't have pain with this doesn't mean everybody doesn't have pain with that. So it's a good way to generally be, not just even health issues, just in life in general.
Yeah, that is incredibly valuable insight to have, I feel like.
Yeah.
People, thank you so much for answering.
Awesome. And Philip just messaged me. He's tuning in. He's told me to tell you hello, and he looks forward to speaking with you on part 2. And
Awesome.
Also, and Nathan as well. Like I said, he hated to miss this, but now in closing of this first segment, this is another 2-part question. I love 2-part questions, and I'm still reflecting on what you just said. Is you said, can you repeat it? You said something, not you can do something, but don't dwell on it. I loved it. That really stuck. Can you repeat that?
I think that you can feel a certain way. You can be angry. You can be sad. You can hate your life. You can blame people. And it's okay to feel like that in the moment and process those feelings. But I don't think you should continuously dwell on those feelings, because that just gives you so much anger. And there's, you know, like there's only so much of your bandwidth that you can give to just being angry at the world. So it's generally what I believe.
Yeah, definitely. And I got this quote. I think I took it from an artist. He said, "It's okay to cry a river, but you got to build a bridge and get over it." And
Yeah,
life don't stop. But okay, now until the closing points, or the closing topic, I want you to leave. In the first part, I want you to leave the young boy, the young girl who's, like I said, stuck in that treatment facility, that hospital, need a heart, liver, kidney, whatever, any type of transplant or chronic illness. What would you say to them about never giving up and to continue to chase and pursue their dreams? So that's on that side. And on a preventative side, should I say, what would you tell that other young boy or girl who think that these type of issues cannot happen to them? You know, like, they think they're invincible. So yeah.
Yeah.
So the side that's invincible and the side who's going through it and feel like there's no hope.
Yeah. So I think for the first side, so people who are waiting for transplants or with chronic illnesses, I think overall, just take it one day at a time and don't focus too much on the would have, could have, should have in the future, blah, blah, blah. Like focus on literally hour by hour, day by day. And eventually, you know, I think somebody put it best by, you know, everything's going to be okay in the end. And if it's not, then, you know, it's not the end. So I think overall, just having that feeling of processing things daily as they come and being in the moment could help you overall. As far as prevention and, you know, people who think that they might be invincible, I tell people, like, I thought that was me. And, you know, I thought I had no health issues and I was never going to go through some crazy health illness, you know, in my younger years, but I did. And that doesn't mean that it shouldn't have happened or that it's going to happen to every single person, but it just to be able to show others that, like, hey, it did happen to me, but like I ended up okay. And you know, there's plenty of us who go through things like this and we end up okay. So be prepared that things might happen to you. And at the same time, understand that even if it does, you will be able to get through it. And I hope those words help someone out there.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And there you have it, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alin, for joining us. Like I said, we're trying to increase our budget so we can get some claps. But right now we clap with our hands until we get the emojis or get something to pop up on the screen. But thank you so much. This interview will impact so many lives and brighten the lives of so many children all across the world. I would just like to encourage you all who tune in to definitely follow our organization on all social media, YouTube at YNOTT Connect, spelled YNOTT CONNECT. and also visit our website to support at www.ynott.org. Now, in conclusion, we ask you all out there, why not become a registered organ and tissue donor today? Anthony, let the crowd say, why not?
Why not?
Thank you so much. You all have a great day.
Thank
See you
you.
at part 2. Take us
Bye.
out.
I am the Blacksmith Cop, and I'm here with my man Eddie Drake of the YNOTT Foundation. And we just want to talk to you.
Somebody's sister, a brother, father, a mother, a wife or a husband, a nephew, a cousin. They're looking for a little bit of love, hey. Somebody show them some love, hey. Why not you?
Why not?
Let me know. Sorry, I'm gonna do. If you guys want me to do.
I am the Blacksmith